Hello and welcome back to Suzerain, and today we are going to Narbel for the presidential visit to Narbel. I was traveling to the snow-covered city of Narbel in the Nargars region for the Rural Development Forum organized by the Minister of Health and the Minister of Education. The momentous city of Narbel had gritty tones to it. It was mostly regarded as one of the poorest cities in Swordlands. Its people were hardy and wary. Even after the discovery of natural resources in the area, years of neglect by the central government were apparent on the buildings and the general infrastructure. Natural resources, namely gas and oil, were now under the control of Gassam, which elevated the operation to the place of power. My task in this forum was mainly symbolic, fake smiles and handshakes with oil barons, meeting with local politicians, but most important of all, making sure that Narbel did not feel like it was forgotten by the government. Surge! Yay! The scenery so far, however, was a reflection of Narbel's neglect. Main roads to the city were not maintained well. There were many bumps and empty, discolored spots in the asphalt. Navigating and swerving to avoid the inconsistencies, our motorcade finally started nearing the city. As if my discomfort from the bumpy ride was apparent to him, Serge rolled down the partition window. Aw, such a good guy. We will be arriving at Hotel West in a few minutes, sir. Thank you for letting me know. Any time, it is my duty. After a moment, Serge started to smile under his mustache. How is life, Serge? Sir, I just want to say, it has been great these last 2 months. As you know, my wife Susan recently gave birth to her son, sir, and now my daughter started a very good high school in Swordland. Get ready, Serge, because life is about to become a lot busier. Oh, I know, sir. It is already very busy. My daughter is a handful. Thankfully, my work times allow me to spend some time with my family, except for these distant trips. I'm very lucky to have this song. How are your children, sir, if I may ask? Diana is as lively as ever, but Frank seems a little distant. That's very normal, sir. He is at that age. All of us went through a rebellious phase. He glances towards the back. I had some trouble communicating with Erica as she grew up, but we found a commonality by going to the plays. You are a good father, Serge. I try my best, sir. I was unlucky. I had never had a connection with my father. He was absent from our life, and I just can't have the same situation with my children. My thoughts faded to my childhood. My father was also absent from home most of the time. I never connected with him, just like Serge. I can't relate to that personally, but you know. I have a great father and a horrible mom that just left immediately when I was young, but oh well, I had a great father. I wonder if Frank had thought of me as an absent father figure. Could this be the reason behind his attitude? Serge continued after a moment's silence. Have I told you, sir? We named him George. The doctor said he is very healthy, and thankfully, so is my wife. That's good. I hope the hospital... Actually, no. Tell me more about Susan. What kind of person is she? She has a good heart. Her family comes from Sarna, so they are a little more traditional. She's beautiful, of course, but what I really admire her is selflessness. Monica's preserving. It can be inspiring at times to have a partner like that. It's only fitting. A lioness for a lion. I've already started thinking about their university education, especially Erica. I want to send her to a good private school, but with the current state of the economy, it's going to be hard on us. Boom. My driver's family shouldn't want for anything in the world. I'll cover your children's education, any other extra expenses you need. Mr. President, there's no way I can... With one look from me, Serge cut the sentence short and nodded at me after removing his hat. Mr. President, I don't know how I can ever repay you for this. I told you I took the bribe to get the 2 extra money, and I gave the entirety of the bribe that I got from that rich guy and just handed it to Serge. That's right. I take bribes so I can help people. I told you. The only reason I take bribes is so I can help the common people, and specifically Serge. Boom. A good education is more valuable than any amount of money. Exactly, sir. You are right. I think I've decided. I will give your name to my boy. George Anton Wagner. May you grow strong like you. I'm sure you will. I love doing that. I do that every playthrough I possibly can, and it's literally the reason I always choose to start rich. I always choose to start rich because it gives me the extra money, so even if I don't take the bribe, I give him the money anyways, because I start with 3 money. I'd start with 1 if I choose poor, so basically, if I just choose 3 being rich, and then give 2 to him, it's basically like I chose poor, but I get to help Surge. And I'm going to help Surge every time. I mean, shoot, if I started poor, I'd probably try my best to help Surge. I'd probably just take the bribe and give the money to Surge anyways. Surge deserves the best, and if you don't support Surge on every one of your playthroughs that you can, you are a bad person. Boom. I don't know what got me onto that. I don't know why, but Surge is, for whatever reason, I just love Surge. He's so cool. The car hit a major pothole and bump, which lifted us up in our seats for a second. Are you fine? Yes, sir, I hope the car is fine, too. The motorcade began approaching the hospital. The Hotel West was supposedly the best hotel in Narbel. The large 25-story main building was undoubtedly one of the taller and more expensive buildings of the city. It towered over the nearby slums and had been a target for protests when it was first built. A crowd was gathered in front of the hotel with the welcoming committee at its center. As he approached the red-carpeted entrance, I could see the mayor of Narbel and his top aides. Surge got out of the car and opened the door. He bowed his head respectfully and gestured towards the entrance, as he always do. See you later, Surge. Thank you, sir. Likewise. As soon as I left the vehicle, the fresh air of Narbel filled my lungs. Almost immediately, everyone present in the crowd flocked over to me, with the excessive display of courtesy, smile, and handshakes, while I donned the mask of a politician, a mask that I was very used to. Stat decreased personal wealth. Worth it. So worth it. Come on. Yeah. Young Sword suspected of terror attack. At approximately 6:46 on Monday, a terror attack occurred in Vesord city center during a rally by the left-wing SCP, or CPS. The attacker, suspected to be working with Young Swords or another organization connected to them, opened fire with an automatic rifle on the protecting citizens. 17 people were killed, including the attacker, who shot himself afterwards. Witnesses testified that the rifle was hidden behind a newsstand. Local police are now wary of the tactic, and all newsstands will be inspected by the police before and during crowded rallies. Further investigations, Young Swords are underway. Whole Sword. PFJP report on reforms. Franz Richter, leader of PFJP, recently outlined their demands for a reform package. He declared that without the implementation of term limits and limited decrees, it would be very difficult for him and his party to stand behind the reform package. That's fine. Protests appear calmer. Yeah! Nationwide protests persist, albeit a slight reprieve in tensions across some cities. Isolated incidents of violence were reported on Monday night in a few major cities, notably in Deir and Lachevin, amidst the prevailing unrest. In Deir, the hometown of revered Circus, a massive memorial march saw tens of thousands of citizens taking the streets in peaceful remembrance. However, dusk fell and the crowds began to dwindle. There were instances of discord. Authorities reported that a fraction of demonstrators resorted to hurling stones and disregarding orders to disperse, prompting police action, resulting in arrests. Elsewhere, the protest in Whole Sword and the majority of other significant urban centers seem to be present a calmer facade, exhibiting fewer confrontations between civilians and law enforcement. As per data from the state press, the authorities have made approximately 9,800 arrests nationwide in connection to the ongoing protests. As we observe the unfolding situation, it is crucial to remain vigilant and steadfast in pursuit of peace and stability in these challenging times. Education privatization proving successful. Our editorial team immediately analyzed the SIPA's report recently revealed to assess the standards of education. We were curious to see how the policies of the last decade have begun changing the performance metrics. Lesbia specifically stood out with a jump of 6 positions forward to 5th out of 68. After a research and analysis collaboration with the Vice President Morgus Curtis and the SMEA chapter leader OMEC, we gained critical insights to how Lesbia increased its education quality. It boils down to 2 major points. One is privatization efforts led by Prime Minister Alvarez that led to most schools in wealthier neighborhoods 1404 to be privatized. This lifted a significant budget burden off the state because the wealthy paid for great education for their kids and were still taxed reasonably in order to divert funds to the state schools elsewhere. The second major factor was the allowance of minor curricular changes for private institutions that led to major improvements in the student participation, together teacher happiness, and boosted the performance of institutions. All in all, the improvements to the system and the massive amounts of 34 billion lira it raised for Lesbia made it a lucrative option. Sordland desperately needs more capital to tackle the recession, and when education is privatized, foreign capital will also aid in established quality schools. The President Magnus Card has pointed out that the SIPA report doesn't include access to education metrics, and that Lesbia has inequality problems. The statement that hasn't been proven with any statistical research from OMEC, which is why it must be taken with a pinch of salt. The Reagan administration could be practical about this term, and look to the Southern example of how to do positive change even though opposition from the Minister of Education is expected. Radical. Seoul needs to answer for his crimes. Looking at history of everything wrong in our country, there's only one figure that everyone points at, Turkin Seoul. He's devolved our country into something much worse than what it was before. He's committed crimes against humanity. We all still remember the Ism incident, and the wounds that have been inflicted on the hundreds of thousands of people with bloodish ethnic backgrounds. We have been calling for his trial, and we believe it is time for the government opens the way for a fair trial by removing the undemocratic and absurd laws that protect him. It's time the Constitution of 1929 that protects Seoul to be changed. People are still waiting for a fair trial, for justice to be served, and for all their questions to be answered. I mean, I'd love to. I really would. I agree. It's a little controversial, and I'm not sure if it's worth risking doing that, because I have much more important things to fix with this Constitution. Maybe we can do a second redo later after we fix other things. Shocking misogynist bit rally. Every day we are appalled by how deep the roots of misogyny goes in our country. We are appalled again when yesterday, during a protest by the Swedish League of Women, counter-protests showed up to disrupt the peaceful rally. In the resulting scuffle between the police, the protesters, and the mob, many were arrested from both sides. The road to change is filled with real obstacles, but we said it before. We can do it! Labor Union Rights March. A large group of labor union members gathered around the city of Volgan to protest against the poor conditions of workers' rights in Sordland. People could be seen holding signs pleading for accountability and basic rights in corporate work environments. Dozens of tourist workers were in the midst of the crowd. One worker was heard saying, "I know the law gives us nothing on paper. Is this the reality we choose to accept?" Others pointed out that the country is relying on the workers to stop the recession, but doesn't give them anything right back. Look at how great the rights are in Volksland. Minimum wage, overtime pay, and safe working regulations. The time for real workers' reform is now. One voice demanded with frustration. We had the opportunity to interview some open-minded managers from corporations. They relayed the companies have little to no oversight. It's hard to disagree that the time for labor reform is long due. Albin Clavin, from the reformist wing of the USP, has seen the potential and announced that work has begun to explore what can be achieved. Will President Rain listen to the demands? Time will tell. Briefing on the current welfare situation. I arrived at the meeting room for my talk with Sierra and Pascal before beginning. I took a moment to appreciate the view from the balcony. The mountains of Narbel were completely covered with snow. While I was mesmerized by the scenery, Pascal Binewol walked up to me. My Minister of Health was ironically somewhat portly, having gained a few pounds since his breakthrough as best-selling writer, but his authority on social affairs could not be questioned. Such a spectacular view. Sierra Walder, the Minister of Education, joined us on the balcony, dressed in a sky-blue pantsuit. Her preference for trousers over dresses made her the subject of much palace gossip, but it didn't seem to bother her in the slightest. Spectacular indeed, but if you look at the opposite direction, you will see what Seoul's decades of neglect did to the city. Most of the people living in Narbel are workers, farmers, and their wives are children. And their wives are children. Sorry. And the wives and children. That was a... I mean, we're not in Alabama. They're breaking their backs for clothes to no pay, all thanks to greedy corporations. My intention to help the working class. I'm glad we see eye to eye on the issue. If you look past the view, you can see the real problems. Real problems like poverty. Yeah, I want to help the working class, you know, by supporting the corporations. Pascal nodded gravely. This was a subject he knew quite a bit about himself. His best-known books were about the plight of Swordland's less fortunate, drawing from his own past growing up in squalor. Well put, Miss Walda. I don't need to tell you about my own experience with poverty. I'm sure you have similar stories, am I right, Mr. President? Thankfully, we never had problems with money. You know the saying, you don't know what you have until it's taken away from you. You don't have to have been poor to sympathize with the plight of the impoverished, as you don't have to have been a woman to recognize Swordland needs for parity among the sexes. Parity among the sexes shouldn't be our first priority. Look at how many high-ranking female politicians our country has. Appearances can be deceiving, Pascal. Her voice sounded bitter. Think about how Lucius Graff got to her current position. I don't necessarily believe the rumors about her and Sol, but she never could have risen so high if she didn't parrot his cause. Gloria Torrey is it an accident that the first female assembly speaker is such a staunch conservative? And then there was Alfonso's habit of promoting women to prominent positions to give Swordland a progressive sheen, when accomplishing nothing in reality. While women in places like Narbel are denied any opportunity to advance, the government can use a handful of female politicians from wealthy families, myself included, to pretend their only obstacle to success is their own motivation, or their own lack of initiative. Meanwhile, those of us who don't use our clout to help powerful men stay in power are designated as angry spinsters. I ask you, Mr. President, does anyone care that your strategist, Mr. Galley, doesn't have a wife? You veered off topic, Miss Walda. Mr. Benowell I answered. As I was saying, isn't it about time Holsworth addressed this country's real issues? Rather than bowing to the wishes of the hawks and fearmongers in the establishment, and averting yet more resources to the military and law enforcement, our welfare, healthcare, and education systems have been decaying since the recession. Swordland's poorer communities are losing hope. Hopelessness and a lack of opportunities can drive people to extreme solutions. We're seeing increased crime, domestic violence, and yes, rising inequalities between men and women. If only we could stop the recession, create jobs and growth. The economic situation does play a role in living standards. Our urban and rural disparities are stark, and the recession hit the weakest harder. We can't fix the economy by ourselves. We have to educate the people and let them create new opportunities too. There's another subject I want to mention. I've been working on improving the rights of workers in our country and proposed a draft bill that is currently being reviewed by our party. Mr. Calvin has already backed me and given his support. Swordland has fallen behind most countries on the subject, and it's my responsibility to ensure that is not the case. I agree, we need to improve the standards for our workers. Exactly. Swordland must provide for its own people to move forward. It is a matter of life and death. Every decade we hear some horrific accident due to employers' disregard of their workers' safety. So would you back the bill when it arrives on your desk, Mr. President? I would be very interested in supporting it once it is finished. I'm relieved to hear this. He smiled. It's getting a little cold out here. Let's head inside and continue our discussion. We headed back inside. The meeting room was already prepared for a state of business. Small gifts for each of us had been placed on the table by the municipality. We took our seats. Let's start with the health overview, Pascal. As you wish, Mr. President. Swordland has a free healthcare system except for a few private hospitals operating under it. Most of the populace receives adequate treatment. Health issues primarily appear in rural areas due to lack of quality service. I'm doing my best to ensure that citizens of all ages receive the best health care they can. I also personally want to solve the high infant and maternal mortality problem. How many doctors and nurses are employed? We have 31,594 doctors and 73,680 nurses working for the Ministry of Health. This is a high number. What I think is, I don't want to be rude, but out of those numbers, how many are in urban and rural areas? Good point, Sierra, Pascal. The data shows that about per 10,000 people in urban areas, there are about 11 doctors, while in rural areas, there are only 3. Treatment time is still too high due to the low number of doctors in rural areas, which gets barely any proper coverage. How many hospital beds are there per 10,000 citizens? There are 10 beds per 10,000 citizens, which is a very good number according to our comparison with other neighbors. We see a lower number in our countries of Agnoia and Welland, but obviously can't match Lesbia and Vagsland. Agnoia and Welland are hardly countries to take as a standard, but it's good to know we aren't in a huge health crisis yet. What is the life expectancy and mortality rates? Our life expectancy is 65 years, and the infant mortality rate is a worrying 85 per 1,000 births, while our maternity mortality is a 90 per 1,000. Be assured that we are doing everything we can to save mothers and their newborns. These numbers are saddening indeed. I agree. We must do everything we can. We are working very hard on improving the quality of the services. Thank you, Pascal. Your in-depth briefing is much appreciated. I want to hear about the education system. With pleasure. Swordfish education is free, but we have a very outdated system that I want to reform. The other important issue is the lack of access to education in rural areas, especially for young girls. Your administration has the power to solve both problems. My highest priority is to get enough funding to be able to build schools in rural areas, while I cleanse out educational system of its nationalist indoctrination and sexist teaching. How many students and teachers do we have? Currently, there are about 5 million students, 3 million primary education, 1 million secondary, 1 million tertiary. There are 155,316 teachers. Swordland is full of young and bright minds. We should keep striving to make education available for all. I think there needs to be a change in the way of thought. We should help children to question and educate themselves. What is the literacy rate of Swordland? The literacy rate of Swordland is at 80%. This is a very good indicator for future growth, but it needs to increase. It's also far lower among girls than boys. If I remember correctly, the most illiterate areas are Bergia and Angland. That is correct, although Lachavin skews the statistics for the Nargis region, which also has a vast number of illiterate citizens. This underlines my point about the lack of access to education. Tell me about the differences between urban and rural education. Urban areas have 3 times the number of schools per 10,000 people compared to the rural areas. Rural areas also suffer from the lack of teachers. I can imagine teaching not preferring desolate area. That's not a very good ratio. The situation is worse than expected. This is one of the most important problems we face, if not the most important. A huge part of the population is forgotten in terms of welfare. Thank you, Sierra. I can fill in the blanks from here. I believe that is everything. Sierra stood up and moved toward the window. She took a deep breath. What is it, Sierra? Look at this impoverished city. The streets full of potholes, the hospital barely functioning, the school half open. This is not just about Sol or even Alfonso failing. This decay as Swordland's forgotten region has been going on for many decades due to structural corruption which is fueled by capitalism. Let's not get in an ideological debate. We need to focus on the issues. One cannot be separated from the other, Mr. Rain. The issue stems from the ideology. Sierra sat down and sighed. One way or another, we need to transform. Greed and unchecked capitalism will not magically provide for the people. Tell me more about your plan. Actually, what are you working towards, Pascal? I want to talk with you first. I personally want to improve the low quality of healthcare in the rural areas. So I created draft plans to increase the salary of doctors and to upgrade the equipment of the hospitals. I can do more with an increased budget. Additionally, a privatization plan to promote private investments in the healthcare system could allocate extra funds. I personally promised that our health systems were to be improved in our term. I fully support you, Pascal. This is one of the reasons I'm optimistic about the upcoming budget debates. With enough funds, we can build hospitals where necessary and expand the quality of our services. I do hope to create competition and increase quality of healthcare with the privatization effort. A private healthcare system would increase the price of treatment and make access worse for the average citizen. The decision not to promote for state control would cost the people dearly. Tell me more about your plan, Sierra. My plans require an increase in government budget. I am to solve the problems we highlighted with allocated money. By building schools in these less fortunate rural areas, and through fundamental changes to the education system, I will unlock the potential of all our children, both boys and girls alike. Improving the situation in rural areas is indeed a good idea. The investment would be the future of Swordland. Imagine the untapped potential of the youth unlocked, the knowledge and the wealth they will generate. Wouldn't a promotion of private education help create additional funds? Yes, but at what cost? I'm not a supporter of the private sector in education, because at the end of the day, they are focused on profit first. My expectation from our government is that we understand and focus on the needs of the people. I appreciate your briefings and plans. We will reconvene at the budget meeting. It was a pleasure. See you at the meeting. I hope to see a change in direction. Did we cover all the necessary subjects? I wish to raise my concern about your scheduled meeting with Gotham, Chairman and former President Mr. Alfonso. There are significant considerations regarding the Narbel workforce and broader community of Gotham blue-collar employees. This could be a strategic juncture to secure a triumph for the labor force. While I don't intend to overstep, I can't refrain from commenting on the labor predictions experienced by workers in Gotham positions. Nevertheless, it's worth acknowledging that the corporation contributes substantially to job creation in regions struggling with poverty. Persuading the chairman to make concessions might prove to be a formidable task. My foremost priority lies in rectifying the economy, a pivotal task. Once that is achieved, upward mobility will naturally follow suit. While the economy holds significance, it doesn't always reflect the broader dimensions of happiness and well-being. The matter regarding laborers is close to my heart. I would personally be grateful if you would be able to resolve that concerns raised by Cortana, Horton, and other laborers. Look, I'll try, but my character's a capitalist, full-on. This right here, this growth bar, is my number one thing. I care about that more than my re-election chances. This right here, that's what I worship. It would be difficult to imagine someone like Alfonso obsessed with the corporation give benefits to workers without him personally gaining from it. In this world, nothing is truly free. I wouldn't anticipate anything else. We must be cautious about the seemingly generous offers. Beneath the surface, they usually come with hidden costs that further tip the scales in favor of the privileged few. Despite the potential divergence in interest, the door for dialogue among differing sides should always remain open. It's important that ideology doesn't obscure our capacity to bring about tangible, effective transformation. I'm encouraged by the willingness of Mr. Manager and Mr. Alfonso to engage in dialogue. It's a step forward. We shall keep you no longer. Thank you both for the discussion. I do hope we won't repeat the same mistakes again and again. Have a good day, Mr. President. The ministers left, and I prepared to leave for other official business in the city. The agenda for the next few days was busy. It also included a meeting with Minister Gus Manager and former President Alfonso at the Gotham branch office. As I made my way out, the weather was noticeably cold, but it didn't keep a group of USP supporters from coming out to cheer us up on the streets. By looking at the citizens' attire, it was easy to understand the current state of Narbel. Some people were wearing clothes a few sizes too large. Some kids did not have shoes, yet there was hope in their eyes. They were excited to see their president in their city. Well, I'm glad to see they're happy for that. But I think for now, this is a good time to end this episode. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell button. And as always, peace.